Yeah, I have to point out that I've got three Berkeley collaborators on all this work, and Alex isn't at Berkeley anymore either. He now teaches at the University of Edinburgh. But Kim Voss is here, professor of sociology, and Kristen George is a current PhD student in sociology here at UC Berkeley. And so, yeah, Berkeley's all over this, this paper. We've been following the advice so far today of Deep Throat to follow the money. You know, that was great advice to Watergate reporters. It's been great advice for us understanding the financial decisions that university administrators have to make. But it's bad advice to social scientists who want to understand persistent inequality of educational opportunity. And so I'm going to not follow the money and bring up some of the reasons why that's the case. Rising tuition, you know, makes it seem intuitive. It seems perfectly logical. Common sense was cited by several questioners throughout the day. And in general, common sense is a great place to start, but you really eventually want to get around to evidence. And the evidence on money is that actually our institutions, public and private, have been doing an amazing job of countering the impact of rising tuition on the graduation prospects and even to some extent on the admissions prospects of young people in this country throughout the period. And it was referred to earlier today by the Berkeleyism, return to aid. More generally, it's called institutional financial aid. It is the within-campus redistribution that goes on. We don't definitely never want to use that phrase, redistribution of resources within the campus, but it does happen. And it's why. But following the money will not tell us why these opportunities are so unequally, unevenly distributed. And so I want to get on with that. I should have clicked through the slide because I was already talking about that. The main point is that what I'm about to show you is that the good old days weren't so good if you were from a working class, poor, or even lower middle class background. Your chances of getting into UC in the grand old days were crummy, and they still are. That's also true at most state universities. It was free virtually, but you couldn't get in. And so this paper with Alex was published in 2011. We had data going back to the 1930s, not just UC, but this is actually nationally representative data. We didn't have a whole lot of information about the people we were talking about because, you know, when you go back that far, you run out of fundamentals. But we did know their parents' education, their gender, their race, and when they graduated from high school. And we looked at their odds of getting a bachelor's degree. And then we estimated the impact of parents' education on that. The numbers on the y-axis indicate that impact, the impact of parents' education on the probability of getting a graduate degree. A high number means parents are really important. A low number means parents are less important. In fact, we got consistent, unchanging to a first approximation, perhaps somewhat downward for women from the 30s to the 1990s, and they break off in 1999. But to a first approximation, no change over all that time in the impact of social background on the probability of getting a college degree. And this is the low tuition era. And so that's part of why I'm saying, you know, it's got to be something other than money. The other thing I want to say is, while it wasn't changing, it was too high. A lot of young people were excluded from the prospect of even attending university, and they still are. To get behind that, we need more information about young people, and we have data. This is the current project with Kim and Kristen that is looking at the impact where we have a whole lot of information from 3 cohort studies done by the National Center of Educational Statistics on how they did in secondary school, what their test scores were, and characteristics of the college they ended up attending, and we're looking at the probability of graduating with a bachelor's degree First, for a pool of all high school students who attend any secondary institution. That's about 70% of these two cohorts and about half of this earliest cohort. And then the other thing we look at is just focus our attention on those who ever attend a four-year institution. The socioeconomic gradient, again, is father's education here. I'll show you in a split second the money by comparison. But you see for all students a big and perhaps declining effect of father's education, but we're going to end up preferring this no-change model. And certainly among those who ever attend, it's lower because there is that difference, the socioeconomic difference between those who attend a two-year and those who attend a four-year first. So this combines all students. This focuses only on those who get into four-year institutions. The parents' education matters less for those who are at the four-year than overall because of the way in which our admissions decisions work against those kids whose parents only have high school degrees. We work to admit first-generation people, but we don't work hard enough, is what these coefficients are trying to tell us. We then step in controls for a number of other things, and we find that for the most part, the stuff we care about the most, the stuff that we think is the most academically relevant, explains most of these socioeconomic differences. And so that in the inimitable words of my friend Martin Sanchez-Jankowski, who was a co-author with Kim and me on three other people on a book in the 1990s, Martin said, well, the problem isn't that we're all worried about making the playing field level for all of our students. The problem is the practice field is so slanted. And that's what these numbers are telling us. And how are they slanted? They're slanted in part because we obsess about their grades just like they do, and we teach them to obsess about their grades. We obsess about their test scores and teach them to do the same, and those who have college-educated parents have a huge advantage in that relative to other parents. And finally, if we control for the selectivity of the college, we explain nearly all the socioeconomic difference in college graduation rates. So that and when we redo it using parents' income, actually this falls, we start low and barely get anywhere. So it's not the money that matters, it's the parents' education that captures the savvy, the cultural differences, the orientation differences that are important for producing these socioeconomic disparities which deflect and affect our institutions. So what I'd like you to take away from this is, first of all, the good old days before college was so expensive still left out an awful lot of young people, and not a random sample of, when the graduation rate was 20%, it didn't mean that the 80% who were excluded were a random sample, a cross-section of society. They were disproportionately poor, working class, and lower middle class. The inequalities we see today are the same. The numbers, people you know is a lousy sample. People you are is even worse. Our intuition, our common sense tells us, I knew lots of working class kids in university when I was there, especially if your hair's the color of mine. The numbers went way up in the 60s. The numbers of everything went way up in the 60s. The universities expanded tremendously. The differentials, the inequalities didn't change at all. The implication of this, I think, is that we should do less selection in the hope of doing more opportunity. This morning we heard from Chancellor-designate Carol Christ that the university's research budget is being spent mostly for the research that's going on. The returned overhead is supporting all these good projects, but it's also the case that they're setting aside some research money for high-risk, high-return opportunities. Why not do that in admissions? Why don't we have a set-aside of a few people who are high risk but high opportunity, or high risk but potentially high return individuals that we do comprehensive review, we read all these things, and yet high school grades explain 80% of the variation in who gets in and who doesn't. We're not taking enough chances with our admissions. Yes, we're under huge scrutiny. We're saying no to we're saying no to most people. And so we're under great pressure to be accountable for when we say, oh, I've got more time than I thought. We're forced to be highly accountable. So I can say this part, it's the most important part anyway, I'll say it slow. We say no to 9 out of 10 applicants, ballpark, and we're highly accountable to those who we say no to. But I think as a resource, all those other applications represent an opportunity to create opportunity for California, for Michigan, for whatever state you're in, New York or wherever. And so that to open that up to have some investment in young people, rest assured that those ones that we end up competing for the most, the ones who are admitted here and 7 other places, they're going somewhere. But this one that we may reach and take a risk on, this might be the only place they get in. Whether you're talking the University of Arizona, University of Michigan, SUNY, and what have you. And that is a real opportunity for them, not an opportunity that's replicated 6 times over elsewhere. And that might be one way that we can break these persistent inequalities that reach back to the 30s, reach back far before tuition was high, and which are not correlated with the money, but are about the social and cultural exclusions that we help perpetuate.